And it looks like we are live. Hello and welcome to the first Geek Out stream of the year, Geek Out number 11. We are trying some new software today, so please be patient with us. If you hear any issues on your end with audio, would appreciate you letting us know in the chat. And here we go. Geek Out stream number 11, Dungeon Born, the Divine Dungeon. I am your host, Carl, and today with me I have my co-host Peter and our
Hello.
good buddy John joining us to talk about
What up? What up?
this amazing book. How we doing, guys?
Having a pretty good time right now. Getting back into town. Ready to do this review for this book.
Yeah, good weekend.
Yes. Very good.
How about you, Pete?
Hey, Jessica and Kaiten. Hello, hello. Thank you for stopping by.
All right. Um, yeah, Dungeonborn, Book
So,
1, Dakota Krout. John and I did the book review. We kind of did a high level discussion um, for the Geek Out stream. All spoilers. If you want to read the book without any spoilers, this is not the stream for you. Here we're going to go through the book, talk about what we like, dislike. Yeah, you've been warned. So,
all right. So let's go ahead and start off with the beginning of the book and just roll into how Cal is formed. I think the author did a great job explaining how, uh, in essence, he or she was created into the core that he is right now,
mm-hmm.
and like starting off as a very small individual, and like all he can think about is like, all right, I'm really hungry, what can I eat? Oh, what do you know, rock. Let's
Yeah.
try and eat that. So what's your guys's opinions about like the beginning, like how he describes everything?
Well, I think it's the ultimate test of a book, right? Like you start it and it's got to catch you in those first couple chapters, and it's a fine balance of, you know, how do you catch my interest and yet build that story, right? And it caught my interest right away just because of the the main characters, right? We talked about a little bit in the book review being gamers. Um, and how we always had the adventurer's point of view, and here we are literally as a baby dungeon core obsessing over moss, and Dakota Krout's humor with Cal as he kind of goes through those early stages, does a good job. uh, and then Danny is just one of my favorite characters. um, but yeah, what do you think, Pete?
I enjoyed it. For me, the title sometimes gives things away, but they do a good job because the title Dungeon Born, it's like, what's going to come of this? So we literally get to see the origin or the birth of the dungeon. But
Mm-hmm.
then it also sprinkles in other information where it's like, oh, hey, things that are made of my influence and whatnot are also dungeon born. So I thought it had quite a few elements that kind of brought it all together, which was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the foreshadowing there, and just like the intro and then the outro, right? What was it we were talking about before we went live?
Oh, main character dies, story's over.
Yeah, right. Uh, yeah, it does a good job. I feel Dakota Krout. I think this is his first book, and I just love the story building from day one. Right, he starts out as the baby dungeon core, and we get introduced to him as he works his way up the ranks, and Danny as the mentor, bringing him along, her humor, and then Dale, uh, just his origin story and how he started out as the sheep herder and following his progression. Um,
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. For Dale, I don't know, it spoke a lot to me because started off as a sheep herder, is completely underestimated the whole way through it. Gets kind of lucky, and then you just see from day one he's a fishy, and then by the end of the book he's brought into a D rank adventure.
mhm.
So
Which, in terms of, let's just say, WoW, for example, that would be like you're in your teens and 20s leveling up. So, like, you have a decent idea about what, like, the basics, and that's essentially where you're at
Mhm.
uh, in terms of for Dale at the end of the book. When Dale is introduced, I do want to point out that when Cal is introduced at the beginning of the book, and by the time Dale is introduced, there was a 10-year, or I'm pretty sure it was a 10-year like gap in between the two characters.
Mhm.
So a lot of time had passed before even someone found Cal as the dungeon. But I think I would agree with Pete in regards to that, like Dale as a character, like when you first meet him, he's definitely underestimated.
Mhm.
No one thinks anything of him. Like the village leader is just like, yes, like this is my score. No one else is here. Like this is like I'm getting everything here from this.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's when we find out about Dale's other side.
It's unique though, I feel. A lot of times when I'm reading fantasy books, uh the characters are just like too good or too pure, right? Or like the One Punch Man, like they're they're awesome. They can do no wrong. With Dale, he literally commits murder within the first couple chapters and it's like, "Oh, this is our hero. Here we go."
All
Like
right.
the life of an adventurer. It's kill or be killed, and
Yep.
watching both of them build up in that arms race between Cal and Dale. Um, but yeah,
yeah,
it's a lot of fun.
yeah,
Like
and that's one thing that the author does well. You're it's not a data dump scenario where they just throw the whole world at you and your
Hmm.
experience it slowly build up through Cal and slowly build up through Dale. And there's a lot of like moments where, for example, when they're going through the dungeon and they're adding more paths and um, oh, what's his name? Craig is like, oh, hey, are you looking at the essence through your eyes?
Right.
Can you tell which way to go? And he's like, what do you mean? I've never been here. And they're checking out the essence, and you know, you switch over to Cal's perspective, and he's like, dang it, how are they able to do that? And then you get Dale asking the same question, and just the progression throughout it.
Yeah. He does a good job building the world without it being really heavy and working it into the dialogue and just like I said earlier, Danny and Cal's banter and their humor. It keeps it fun as you learn more about the world and the magic system and just about how truly unique Cal is as a dungeon because they do grow so quick throughout the book. I think early on, Danny's talking to Cal about how it takes 50 years before an animal dungeon core can even figure out how to talk to humans. And Cal is able to eavesdrop on these adventures from day one and learn and adapt. And you get to see just his drive for perfection as he crafts his dungeon. And for me, I think this was one of my first lit RPG books that I listened to because the series, all five books are out now, and he's been working on it for a while. Um, but it's just a lot of fun having both those perspectives. Sorry, kind of going down the rabbit hole on the dungeon and as an adventurer, just going and slaying your mobs and how um, Danny kind of works in that that gamer lingo about like why things are the way they are and talks her through it. Um, what were some of your favorite characters? I could go on and on about Danny.
Well, I want to point out, from my point of view, Danny is probably the sassiest character that I have read about in a while. Uh,
She...
just the amount of back talk that you get from her, and just comebacks and everything. It just makes a great character from her perspective, being a wisp
Mm-hmm.
with no body.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I do want to point out, as you were talking about earlier, I think the author, Dakota, what he made it so he wants this book to be so real, like realistic, because like we play games, usually we don't think about, when we die. I'm like, oh, we died, time to respawn. Like this is, as Carl pointed out before, die or stay, do what you can to survive.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and essentially, uh, that's what I feel like he's trying to portray for this book. Just trying so desperately, like if you get poisoned by something, if you don't get healed, you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Within potentially a few days, in an hour, that kind of thing. So I think that's a really cool aspect. When reading through these books, just keep that in mind. That this isn't just like some characters have main character immunity, that kind of thing. So,
The
oh, go
I
ahead.
was about to say the magic system's pretty in depth. When you were talking about the healing, I just re-listened to the section where Danny introduces just the concept of healing as like some of the first parties go through, and I believe the healer was, is it a wood or earth
Yeah, it's a wood
wood
cultivator, and that
cultivator.
all different types can heal.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Grandma.
Um, and how like even though they all can heal, and I think John and I talked about it a bit in the review about just like the magic system and their essence and how in depth that is, but like the essence they use is like the element, right? So she said I think like wood, it's worms weaving through the body, or like if you got healed with fire, it would feel like you were getting cauterized. So um, yeah,
I do want to go over the ranking system, because they kind of briefly explained it at the beginning of the book
sure.
and left it like to your own system as you continued reading. But so there are A through G, like levels,
Mm-hmm.
and then within those levels there are certain numbers, and depending on what letter you are, it depends on how many levels or numbers are in between each level.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
I thought it was stagnant. I thought it was 10 between each.
I thought, well, let me read this off real quick, because I'm pretty sure. Are you sure all the way
Yeah,
up
yeah.
to A, all the way up to A?
Or I thought top was like triple or quad S. I thought it.
There's a couple
I'm pretty
different
sure.
It's
sources.
something that's said in the very beginning, but I'm pretty sure each letter has 10 rankings within it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's
Uh,
how it
Oh,
is.
Jessica and Kyton, I might start reading these books. Sounds really cool. You definitely should, and Audible is amazing.
If
Listen to it
yes.
doing anything in your life, and you can incorporate the whole family, like me and
That's
Carl
right.
here.
Reading time.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, turn it on during breakfast, or as you're winding down for the end of the night. I Audible everything,
Audible is amazing,
everywhere.
Yeah. To
and
work.
audiobooks. But yeah, if you like video games, it's a great series, right? But it's not a video game book. It has this in-depth magic system, and the levels, while they translate, break into the tiers. And yeah, you were saying, John, like how that goes through where like G is the equivalent to moss, right?
Yeah, it's like, I think it's like inanimate objects,
Mm-hmm.
where uh, yeah, like moss, rocks, that type of stuff. So that's like all in that ranking system. And then like F would be, your standard human.
Hmm. Like a
Like those
baby's around
rankings.
0 or something, right? And then like
Yeah.
laborers in the book, they compare it to, a couple ranks above, like the low F ranks.
And these are where fishies are like the term fishies are introduced in the book as like complete novices because as an adult you're like you have no experience dealing with essence or like
Right.
energy within your body. So like this is the very beginning.
What was Dale's first job in the dungeon?
Don't die.
Don't die.
Don't die, which is a very very real saying because for this realistic types reading style, writing style, like that's like when you go into a potentially deathly style dungeon, like you're if you die, that's it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, it doesn't change, right? All the rules stay the same, and in its own way, it happened in the book. Like, don't step in the stuff. Gotta keep it
yeah,
PG. The actual rules a little bit different, but yeah, like don't get out of range of your healer. Um,
So, sorry, kind of backtracking there. With the scaling and the leveling throughout it, they just do a little snippet at the beginning here. But because I've read the other books, it's just because that's all that's relevant for us.
hmm
I mean, at the end, we make it from F to D,
hmm
so it's not a huge level thing. We get a couple characters introduced where it's a magus for like the portal mage or
Right,
like for Father Richard.
right.
So, yeah.
I think the portal mage's name is Amber.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And you're right. He doesn't overwhelm us with the information, but does kind of like introduce it, especially as the town becomes more developed. You start seeing some of those
Yeah.
bigger names, and was it Father Richard when he shows up and just kind of displays his power at the A rank? Does that sound right? I think he's
Yeah.
A.
Is
Um,
he A? Or I thought it was B.
he
I
might
can't
be B.
remember.
Anyway, he's awesome. Um,
Yeah.
Yes.
Another thing I enjoyed with the whole scaling and the general populace and everything, every race kind of has their own take on it because
mm,
you meet the dark elves and they're all pretty well off and high ranked, and then when Dale and Hans go to the city, he talks about the sewer system and a couple other things, but how not everybody can be a cultivator because the economy, because you need these other job types and these other people doing different things for everyone to succeed. And yeah, that's something that I enjoy in life and other things,
yeah,
having everything as a whole working together.
and it all comes down to cultivation, right?
Yeah.
Back when, like when he was in the early F ranks and they gave him that memory stone to teach him how to properly cultivate and pull in this essence, it was all that corruption from just, forget how they explained it, but
Everything passively absorbs essence throughout their natural life.
pretty much, yeah. And Dale comes, really lucks out because he was only expected to live 10, 15 years after that certain point because of just how much his essence was full with corruption and caused him an early death. So by becoming a cultivator, uh, their lifespan just expands, to what?
Drastically.
Yeah. The higher you go, it can become hundreds of years, and just imagine how much more, essence and cultivation you can do in that time, but also just learning and training
Yeah,
and
more of life and
yeah, to become that mage or that like spiritual rank. And
and
Dale goes through it really quick, and he explains just the fact that because it is a dungeon with no affinity, and anybody can come there and train. He goes from F to D, where I think they talk about taking like 20, 30 years maybe to get from F to D
or yeah,
for the
something like
typical.
that. I think when Father Richard was talking about it, he was saying it would take 20 years off of his breakthrough to get 2D.
Yeah, yeah. And I think Hans is the youngest in his first party, and he's in his 60s, and
Yeah.
he's C tier.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Which, speaking of Hans, uh, he let's see here. So group wise, you first get introduced to Hans, Craig, and what was the other guy? Bob,
Oh
Tim?
man.
Tim? No,
I don't know. We don't spend we
I
They
yeah, you don't spend a lot
not
of time with them.
all they don't all really have critical roles. It's like you get to meet them due to what they do in the party and because we need five
I,
man,
I
but
I
they
wonder
don't really contribute
I wonder if the
as
names are intentionally so simplistic and if
forgettable.
yeah,
Yeah.
forgettable in a fantasy setting that like in my head I'm like, "Oh, the tank. Oh, the range. Oh, Hans. Craig."
Like here's this one
Party
guy.
leader. Um instead of like who they actually are cuz they you interact with them a little bit but it's pretty much all Dale and Cal, right? And
Yeah.
Yes,
Danny.
until Hans starts cracking out those sexual puns
Yeah.
that we all know and love.
Yeah, there's a little bit of graphic language, but
I it's
it's endearing and it's uh
you have to know the references,
more
I feel.
puns.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
straight out um graphic language. It's more along the Disney lines that if you catch the play on words, or when Sassy Danny is like, "Oh, you dirty dungeon, you," and Cal being a little baby dungeon is like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah,
he
he
doesn't
gets
understand
a loose
sarcasm at
eye.
all.
Reproduction. Oh, like the bunnies, the moment in the bunnies, like
Yes.
first couple chapters, how it you see how advanced and how complex like Cal can literally make objects fall out of mobs and stuff and like create these things and then he gets a bunny rabbit and he makes a couple bunny rabbits and he's like, oh, how long until they reproduce? And Danny's like, oh, it might be a while,
Yes.
giggle giggle giggle. um and it's like, hey buddy, you need more than just male rabbits to make more rabbits. So it's kind of along
Interesting.
that line. It's not straight up. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's subtle. A lot of puns. A lot of
a lot of
puns.
puns. I laugh throughout this whole book, for many different reasons too. Just like when Dale goes and learns a hard lesson, and you can kind of laugh at it, and also think back to your dungeon crawling days of when you made wrong turns down a tunnel in Undercity and kill half the raid. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Those good times
it
though,
was good
because
times.
you know, for the horde, you know.
And you get that vibe though from the party group too, right? As they're going through it, as much as they're have their banter with Dale. Um,
It progresses well. It goes from, don't die, that's your only
hmm
job, and they're kind of protecting him, to he starts getting his essence going, and it's like, okay, now you got to use your vision to see the traps and
right.
to check out the airflow, and he's getting a little more until the final battle of the book where he's got a completely new group and he's
hmm
got to take more of an authoritarian, hey, this is what we're doing,
Right.
role for everything. Which
Yep.
for me, Dale kind of comes into his own right after he gets pulled into the D ranks and he's eating and he's talking to High Magus Amber, or not Amber, Tree Mage Lady Food,
Brianna,
uh, Rihanna. No, that's the Dark
that's a
Elf.
dark elf.
Uh,
What are you talking
The
about?
the Pleasure
yeah,
House.
the owner of the
Oh,
pleasure.
Chandra.
Yeah.
Chandra.
Chandra. Yeah, yeah. So when he's talking to her and he's like, "Oh, what can I do to repay you?" and he's like, "I'm ignorant of the world. What can I do?" And it's not nothing comes of it, but that's the point in my mind where he's no longer just flying by the seat of his pants, and
Right.
he's like,
He's no longer
"Hey,
reacting to
I
stuff.
know I don't, I'm not super knowledgeable about this. Let me step up my
Mm-hmm.
game. Let me go into my hyperbolic time chamber and train."
Yeah. Hey,
I
So,
memory stones are
um,
kind of like that. But yeah, he finally you see the progression. The John and I talked a bit offline about how much he loved Dale in the beginning, but you really get to see him grow. Uh, and he he's not the most likable character in the beginning. He's arrogant. He can be a bit cocky at times. Um,
well, I feel a lot of that's product of the situation, and
right.
that's where I kind of relate to it. Because, for example, me getting into management so young and dealing with older people, they're like, "I don't care who you are. You don't know anything.
Mm.
This is my house. I'm gonna do whatever I want." And I'm like, well, you see here, but and Dale
Sorry
runs
about
into the
you.
same thing right off of meeting Frank.
Yeah.
Frank's like, "Oh, hey, Dan," or whatever. He misses his name up
Right.
on purpose,
Or
and Dale, yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
So Frank messes his name up on purpose, and he tries to correct him, but then he's just got this feel. But like I was saying earlier, by the end, or as soon as he gets pulled into the D rank, he's like, I know I need to get better. Let's do this.
Right.
Really dialed in.
oh, I do. I understand where you come from that angle, but I feel like innately, as like personality is concerned, I feel like he sticks his nose into just about anything that revolves around the town, the dungeon, or
Yeah.
him. And it start after a little bit, it starts getting on my nerves when I start reading more. Like obviously Dale's a good character, so on and so forth, but for me, like I'm a huge into like anti-hero stuff.
Mm.
And he just while he is kind of an anti-hero, he tries to be a little bit too much of a hero and just really my likability, this is my personal opinion, my likability for him just keeps going down, down,
But
down, down.
I think a lot of that is the author's writing style,
Mm.
because he
True.
is our main perspective, or one of them,
Mm-hmm.
and our main character. We see the other mages and whatnot, but only when they're interacting with Dale. Like everything that we see in the town, everything we see in the dungeon is from either Cal's perspective or Dale's
I
perspective.
mean,
So, yeah, he's got his nose in everything, but that's our main character, or where we're viewing from.
we're covering the first book, so spoilers on the ending. What was it, Pete?
Oh, main character dies, story's
Yeah,
over.
yeah, yeah. So they're
But not really.
well, they're two sides of the same coin, right? Like I feel like in a lot of ways they're personalities. Uh, I just like Cal, Cal's the yin to Dale's yang or whatever on some of their
Okay, okay.
temperament and
Yeah.
just their approach to stuff. Um,
Well, I feel Cal is more of a third person perspective on like, yes, his body's there, but it's out of harm's way.
mhm,
So he's able to like view, like he has such a closed in view on, his surroundings
right.
because he's obviously limited to that room that he's in. But he learns at such a rapid speed that any information, knowledge that he gets, which that's power, by the way, he uses it to his advantage to continue to grow.
Mhm.
And then for Dale, on the other hand, I don't know. I just got my vibe for him was just like he's a likable character at the beginning. Obviously the situation is not good for him,
Mhm.
and he's like, yeah, all these things thrown at you at such a young age. And as Peter was saying, like as a manager or as a leader in a large group scenario, you have to take control of that type of thing. And if they don't respect you, it's kind of hard to do that.
And
Um,
he pushes his way through, right? Like at the end of the day, he's still
yeah,
in
like he gets
charge.
his point
Yeah,
across.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you get to see several different iterations of it. For example, oh, what is it, James from the Portal Guild?
Mm, yeah.
Or you kind of see it all the way through, where Frank the guild leader is just like, oh, Dan, whoever, I don't care, you're nothing, you'll
Right.
get money,
Right.
and kind of swindles him off the bat, and then it gets really bad with, I just said his name, the portal guy,
James.
James.
James, when James meets him, and, due to the powers of being the landowner.
Mm-hmm. The mana contract, right? That's
Yeah.
enforceable. That saved him a time or two.
Get off my
Yeah.
back.
Right. Right. Death sentence. Um, but yeah. Sorry, we were going down that rabbit hole and I lost the train of thought.
We were talking about groups and stuff. Uh, he comes into contact with a few other people. Hans is definitely a main character, mainstay.
He's one of my
So
favorites.
if you start reading about Hans, definitely like you won't have enough of him. He will definitely come back. Then we get introduced into Tom, and then into Adam, and then
Oh,
onto
Oh
Ross.
man,
Tom.
the introduction for Tom
Mm-hmm.
just oh man, the feels. I can't remember the exact verbiage, but he's like, "Oh, I have the name of my father and my father's father. I am a barbarian named Tom." It's like all this build up, this epic
Yes.
stuff,
Yes.
and it's
My name
it's
is Tom.
Yes.
Tom. But we get the feel from Hans. He's like, really, all that for Tom,
Yeah.
Yep.
and that's where for me the audiobook just sold it
The
because
narration's amazing. Ficus Adams does a great job.
yeah, but Hans is like whispering and it gets quieter. The cook who's overly loud and
Mm-hmm.
used to dealing with all the soldiers, is actually loud. Um, yeah, you felt like Tom was like, yeah, really selling the
All that
name.
build up, and for what?
Yeah.
I'm noticing
And
a
then he
trend with the names. They're very complex. Um, or not. Uh, but
I
yeah,
don't know the way the author speaks for Tom, the yay old English, uh, kind of threw me off.
the accents.
Well, it's not that. Oh, it's just how he phrases and uses his words,
Mm-hmm.
and it's overly. I'm nothing against Tom or anything. It's just he's the only one that speaks differently for whatever reason.
Yeah, the
Uh,
barbarian
Yeah, but I
language.
think it adds character to it, adds different cultural flavor.
Mm,
some flair.
yeah. Um, what what was your guys's one of your favorite passages or scenes? Like, there's so many comedic moments. There's so many action moments. Um, how about let's start
Oh
with like
man.
favorite battle in the book,
Oh. Hmm.
because
Well,
there's a lot of
mine
combat.
there is a lot of combat. Mine, oh man, that's I would probably have to say because obviously at the end of the book you have the main fight, the big struggle.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my favorite one, the one that was described most for me, was when they created what was it, Rail,
Mm, I was thinking that too. Like that just
the big bunny.
yeah. That whole
What was it, a 600-pound bunny?
Yeah, size of a black bear or
Yeah,
something.
when
yeah,
is it Craig goes to report it to the guild
Yeah,
afterwards
yeah.
and talk
yes.
about build up and just yeah, everybody snickers and what? A bunny? Uh
It's like, well, if you see that giant ass bunny, like, I'd be running scared too. So
yeah. I agree. I think when he reopened the dungeon for the second level, just that whole dungeon crawl there is up there as one of my favorite action scenes with that boss fight. Uh, what do you think, Pete? What was one of your favorite action scenes?
You know, I can't spoil the other books. It gets better. There's a lot of build up for this one.
Mm,
I'd have to go with like the end one with the distortion cat.
mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that by far was because like normally in a book the main character is not going to die.
Right.
There's no way the main guy's dying, and
What
it
happened in
doesn't
this
leave you
book?
hanging for very long. But the fact that, oh, the fight you guys were talking about, where they just meet Rail, and Rail, Dale tries to protect their tank. Can't think of his name. Tank from Rail, gets knocked down, is about to die, grabs the dagger, defeats him. It's like, okay, that was a close call, but in the end, or the final battle, he dies. Like Han sacrifices himself to allow them an opening,
Mm-hmm.
and then Dale ends up dying, and they're trying to save him.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to see more of our newer characters, for like Rose, where she's like, hey, you're gonna listen to me, we're gonna do this now. It's just so much potential for the next one.
Yeah.
But as far as combat goes, like, that scene did a lot for me. Brought in new characters, kind of showed their flavor. Main character does die, and now we've got this new element where Cal has reconstructed him. We'll rebuild it, we'll make it stronger, kind of moment.
Right.
Yeah. And then now he's got a new toy. He's got the cat and the tentacles to play with,
Mm.
which we haven't seen him do anything with yet because it was the ending. But yeah, that
You made a lot of good points there. I've read a lot of Dakota Krout's books, and this is very early for him. Um, the writing and the combat and everything, if you enjoy the first book, it gets better. I think, John, you're up through book 2 at this point.
Book two.
Yeah,
Finish book two.
yeah. Would you agree with it? Like it all just kind of he gets better through book 2 as well on the
Yeah,
writing
like
and the
it. I mean,
combat.
it continues to build up and everything, and
Hmm.
then like towards the end of book two, that's when stuff hits the fan, and then
Every
like
book
that's when you
stuff hits the
really.
fan.
Yeah, I mean, but this one, like after I mean, you're already hooked on the book,
Hmm.
and then now you're dedicated, and you're like, all right, what's going to happen in the next chapter? And so, by the time you get towards the end, you're like, okay, now I can't put this book down because they're in the middle of this super awesome scene
It's
or
it continues
passage.
to yeah, it continues to scale and to escalate. Um,
Yes.
other thought on Peter's bit was I really enjoy his new group when he gets them together. And I enjoy following them in the future books, but in a lot of ways they're dynamic. I don't know, I feel like they're the island of misfit toys, with Tom and Han, um, with Rose. Like you said, she just starts, you're going to do this now, just get it together. Um,
Well.
yeah, and it's refreshing to see that other side of her, because when we first meet her, she's timid
hmm
and she's shy,
hmm
and everyone's treating her like she's a broken toy, because her center's been broken, because she's a rare breed of a chaos cultivator.
hmm
But then we get to see, she actually has a spine
hmm
and has potential and room to grow.
Yeah,
I have seen that the new Pokemon Mewtwo Strikes Back is on Netflix. I haven't watched it yet, though.
I have. I enjoy it. I
Isn't it a clone, or it's like a repeat but done
Yeah,
in new animation?
yeah.
Okay.
It
Oh, the first one.
and I think they do some minor changes to it. It's been a minute
Okay.
since I've seen the original one, but I enjoy it.
Is it
Okay.
based off the first movie?
It is.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's pretty good. Definitely worth
I'll
checking
have
out on
to
Netflix.
take a look at it.
Yeah.
Well,
Um.
we don't
Yeah.
want to forget about the last member of the group, Adam.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adam's
Adam the
awesome.
cleric.
Well, okay. So sidestep here. The way that he brings in characters and you don't know jack about them, he doesn't tell you their name, I really enjoy, because at the very beginning of the book, you're meeting Cal, and he doesn't, at that point, he doesn't have a name, and then Danny gives him a name, and it's like, okay, now I can put a name to this persona, to these actions, and same thing with Dale. Like, while he's got those 4 people he's going through the mountain with, you don't know their names. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, four or three of them die anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but then you get his name right at the end of that scene. And same thing with Tom. Like, Tom, we first know him as the guy who swings the hammer out of revenge or whatever and ends up killing a teammate. So we've got this kind of negative bias towards him. But then, he shows and holds his own throughout it. And oh my bejesus, does he develop further in other books? That's all I'm going to say. But,
Yes.
and then same thing with Adam, when the tank, after the first big rail fight, gets injured, Adam is the guy who says, "Oh, you missed a
Mm-hmm.
kink over there," and Hans, straightens it out and heals him. So you already have this actionable persona, and as a cleric, you're like, okay, he's a good guy. He's got to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I like how he introduces a character before you introduce the character. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, you see the character first, and then the real introduction happens later on, when it's like, oh, this is your fourth person for your group, for your dungeon. Like,
Yep.
oh, it's like, hey, I remember you. You did that one thing for me. You're a good
Yeah.
person.
It's
And it gives you a chance to kind of develop a feeling about them because you see something they've done and then you've had your subconscious working on it, and then by the time you come back to it, you kind of have like a preset or predetermined thing, but then yeah, it develops from there.
he does a good job about that. But being a gamer, I still can't help but constantly reference MMOs. But when you're doing dungeon crawls, you see lots of random people in the capital, and that name that catches your eye, or that armor that catches your eye, and you pay attention to it, and then all of a sudden they're in your next pre-made group as you go through the dungeon, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and with the Misfit Toys comment, there's definitely been a lot of pickup groups of Misfit Toys going into some dungeon crawls. But it's a good book. Trying to think what else we wanted to hit there. Uh,
Uh, how about, like, if in terms of like the book is concerned, um, did it do anything for you in regards to, like, did it make you think about anything differently, in regards to just like any key concepts that you took from the book, like the overall message?
I don't know if this is along the lines for your question.
there
Oh, go ahead,
oh,
Pete.
there were like two profound things that Danny says, and I wish I had the quote in front of me. The first one is when, oh man, it's right at the beginning.
I think.
Oh yeah. He when he's expanding and he ends up taking out the grove that has the tree in it,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, maybe anyway. Danny's pretty much like, do better, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, and she's like, I don't need you to be sorry. I need you to be better. I need you to be the best dungeon you can be because we need each other,
Right.
and that for me, like, more people need kicked in the ass.
Yeah.
Um, and have that other side of you or that relationship where they're going to hold you accountable. So
It's
that was a big
motivational.
thing.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, when Cal finally is expanding up and he's putting um, the viewing into the boss room,
Mm-hmm.
when they're like, wow, the stars. And Danny's pretty much like, oh, they don't care. They're too busy doing everything else in their life. They don't stop to smell the roses, or stop to enjoy the little things in life. And that's something I feel people need to do more. And
The quote
it.
is really, really well written, and I thought that was the
Yeah,
first one you were going to lead in with, because that's the one that came to mind for me, was when
yeah,
he's just gushing over the stars and how amazing they are, because he's been so focused. Like, he starts out, in a puddle, and we follow him to this point where he's expanded to two different levels and he's looking up at the stars and it just after everything he's created and accomplished it blows his mind, right? And
Yeah.
her quote there on it where she talks about how people don't even appreciate it. They're so focused on, whatever it is right there going on in front of them, that they never stop to appreciate the finer things in life, right?
Like money, for example.
Right.
Also, in that quote, the author slips in there, like getting to the 208th page of a
Yes.
book, and I was like,
Yes.
Yes, breaking the fourth
okay,
wall. All
okay,
right.
Yes.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So Danny had that's the only fourth wall I think we ever break, but yeah, it was. I enjoyed the little flair.
Uh, because of the journey you follow with Cal, starting out as a baby dungeon and working his way up, you do get a lot of those philosophical questions. Um, and again, as he's kind of reminiscing, it's another way for Danny to kind of explain the magic in the world a little bit more. And with the ranking system, like they explain it for adventurers, and it's based off of like when they open up their meridians, like the first five ranks are just acquiring um, essence or
Enough
cultivating,
essence.
and
Yeah.
then you have to break through on a new concept for a dungeon or open up a meridian for the
Isn't it
adventurers.
isn't it breaking into the C or the D? No, the C you have to like think of a concept.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They do
And D
break
is the
it. Yeah,
meridians.
you're right. You're right. They do break it down a little bit more there. Before I lose my train of thought, with oh snap, never mind. Go Pete.
So the whole idea of like the progression, essence is just the purest or littlest form, and then when Dale hits the D or Cal hits a D, you've got to then break everything you know and
Mm-hmm.
break it into fractals,
Mm-hmm.
and you need a spiral made of spirals, continuing with further spirals. I it relates to me kind of in the MMO feel because like just when you think you have a handle on life and you got that epic gear, that next patch comes out and you got to take all your knowledge and skill and stack it onto the next layer to really fractal or bring it all
Yeah.
together for the new expansion.
Have you guys ever played Path of Exile?
No.
No,
No. All
I've
right.
I've people have suggested it.
So here, if you ever get into the game, which it's very closely related to, I'll just say Diablo playstyle,
Okay.
the the tree, the evolution tree for like how you do your skills is gigantic. So the way I think about it is, so let's just say you have your starting point and you can only go in 4 or 5 or 6 ways. Well, after like, I'll just say 5 levels, or in this case, 10 for all intents and purposes for going up from F, trying to go into D. Once you get to that certain range, and you hit that next level, now you have like 18 to 30 trees that you can go down. And you're like, which one do I choose now? So, like, all this new information and all this new
Wait, wait
stuff
for the next
is going to
books.
be going on.
Like as you're going on this,
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil how like as the higher tiers you get, how much more you have to do. But yes,
That's how I think about it.
yeah,
So it's just like, so every time you level, it's like, and time to start thinking about new abilities
yes,
and
always more,
new
always more, and
things.
that's
Yes.
a lot of what Cal is, right? Like always striving to be better, to do better. It's very motivational, as even though he's a narcissist, just sitting there focusing on making himself
Yes.
better all the time, and only
Yes.
paying attention to himself. He is a dungeon, but
Yes.
yeah, the grind and learning new things, and with Cal, you really see it develop with his like intelligence on different things. Um, and back to back the other way on the rabbit hole, with the philosophical questions that all of a sudden he starts asking, right? Like at one point, I think he breaks up. Maybe it was the D ranks. And he's like, "Hey, am I eating their souls? Like, is that what I'm doing when I'm killing them?" And it's like, "Oh no!" Like, I think Danny throws in her humor talking about how hard that would be, or how you couldn't do that, but you just absorb the essence that from when they die, that they give off when they die, right? And
Or
explaining.
yeah, the
The energy.
essence
Hmm.
Yeah.
from their soul separating from their body.
Yes, yes. Um, but yeah, it definitely makes you think. It's definitely a motivational book. A lot of fun, a lot of laughs. Um, it does a good job introducing us to this world, and yeah, it just continues to scale. Um,
Any
Or John, what was your profound thing? Because you asked us, and we went off on tangents
we
about
did go
quotes.
down the rabbit hole.
oh, like the overall message?
Mm,
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
takeaway.
I don't know. To in terms of like you guys pretty much hit most of them. The only other one that I can think of that's different than what you guys have mentioned is the fact that Cal is trying to absorb all this knowledge. And I mentioned this before. Knowledge is power,
Hmm.
and essentially all this information, like he has access to all this information and he utilizes it, coming up with new uh, innovations, techniques, that type of stuff. And the message I got out of that is we have all this access to information out here. Whether we choose to do something with it or not is up to us. But we have all this extra information, and
Yeah,
I don't know. I think we should be doing something with it instead of just letting it sit there.
it
Yeah.
it reminds me about a rant that I think Pete went on about just books and all this knowledge out there and the importance of um, the
Being able to share it.
Challenging yourself in different ways because
yeah.
everybody is all about Netflix, and that's only a brief, or you only stimulate certain parts of your mind. You're viewing it, the characters are already displayed, the conversation is happening, you're just viewing it.
Mm,
And where I enjoy books is you have to create the characters from a description yourself, and you have to make it in your mind's eye for the combat, and different authors do better or worse at portraying the idea, but at the end of the day it's all your imagination, and it triggers a different, you know more of your brain, in my opinion, because like watching a show, it's very passive, everything's done for you.
yeah.
Listening to a book, it's, yeah, you gotta activate more of your senses to bring it all together.
There's a lot of studies out there that point to that, just the benefits of reading and kind of tying into the theme that John brought up, just learning and developing. And Cal really does that, right? Constantly striving to do better, especially after that moment Pete talked about where Danny kicked him in the butt. Um,
And that's my favorite thing, is it doesn't stay in one vein. Like it kind of branches out, because at the beginning she's trying to kick him in the butt to get him to develop things, but then he gets that moment where he sees the sky for the first time, and it's just like, okay, enjoy the little things.
hmm.
Or also, Danny has a conversation with him. It's like, oh, that's why I enjoy it here so much, because you take pride in your work, and you don't care if you lose. You value people, and you value doing a good job and being awesome.
Yeah.
So,
If you when you guys remember like reading some of the inserts of like how he delves out like rewards,
Hmm.
he bases it depending on the people that come in like group wise. If there's very novice looking group, the group might receive bigger rewards if they fight something that is a harder difficulty for them. And so I think he's very open minded, and he's very fair as well to everyone that comes into his space.
He talks about that a lot, rewarding their effort and their intelligence, and even when he'd much rather absorb their essence and grow stronger, he holds himself to those values, right? Um,
Hmm.
Well, that's something I feel like we do, but we don't really do. Kind of like at the end of a soccer game, you're always like, good game, good game.
right.
Even though you don't feel it, and they made you walk down this line, shake everybody's hands.
Yeah. But did you mean it? Cal means
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, he means it.
uh,
It's like what I really meant to do was, push you over here or
yeah,
Yeah.
kick
yeah.
kick you in the shin. Yeah.
It book one we just get a little taste of this world. It primarily all takes place on the mountain, right? And in the dungeon. Um,
Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah. I think
there's
there's only
one
one
scene,
snippet. Yeah, where
um,
you go to the Capitol.
which I'll be honest, it's one of my favorite scenes, especially when
Oh,
Dale is explaining to the group all the fun he
yeah,
has,
yeah,
opening up, talking
the
about how,
humor
yes,
afterwards.
yes, just so
Oh man.
much. He was so excited about the sewer system, and
Yep.
then explaining the meal at the pleasure house, and we won't go down the
And
rabbit hole
how
on
they,
that since
yeah.
there are kids kid viewers, but again, all puns and references, and we get a good laugh and get to see again. It's the Dakota does a good job. Like there are these moments where the characters are like crazy combat. You're following Dale, and you're like, oh wow, like he's grown. He's no longer this fishy. Like he's doing well, and then you realize how naive he is. Like yeah, he's a noble.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
he's in charge of all this stuff, but there's so much that just goes over his head. And in a
Is he really in charge?
is he really in charge, right? Um, he talks about that with the dark elves about how like oh if there is a council they don't invite me. It's like wait what? You're the landowner. What do you mean like people are meeting and making decisions without you? Are you really in charge? Um,
But he does well with that too, because when he talks to oh Tree Lady Pleasure
yes,
House,
yes,
he
Chandra.
talks to
Chandra.
her Chandra. He's like, hey, I'm ignorant. I don't know what's going
We
on.
see that growth. Um,
Yeah,
I don't think you get a whole lot of that in the beginning, and he's constantly reminded. And like Frank really hooks him up with that starter group, right? Like the reason
yeah,
why he's able to grow and scale so quickly is because they're the first in the dungeon. They have all that built up essence that they get first grabs at. And he has like a really strong group that's running him through this. And then there's so many moments where you're just like, wow, yeah, like you're ignorant. Um,
but I think it does a good job accelerating enough to give us the world, get us to a
mm-hmm,
decent spot.
mm-hmm.
Because so much of WoW, for example, those first couple levels, like it's not really
Right.
memorable, and it doesn't matter. You just want to,
You're just learning
get
how
to a
to
spot where
move.
you're able to,
Yeah,
yeah, do something.
right. Um, and I think it's probably intentional to a certain extent, like just how
Yeah, yeah,
how clunky Dale could be at time. It gives the author a way to introduce more of these concepts for his party members to come in and say, hey, you know, stop being a dummy and pay attention to this, you know. Um,
Like a scapegoat.
mm-hmm.
Uh, every show or movie that you've seen, video game, there's always sometimes the main character. There's always that one person, brand spanking new, doesn't know what's going on, and they question literally
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
What? How do you do this? Well, let me explain this to you,
Mm-hmm.
and then they go into a detailed description about what's going on.
I
So Dale happens to be that character in this situation.
I feel it's done well though. It's not too heavy. It's sprinkled through the book, but yeah. And Cal's a bit of that character too, right? As he learns and grows.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, yeah.
he's different. Well,
We just like him
Well,
better.
yeah,
At least I like him
he's
better.
better. He's like one of those people that can memorize everything, like one of those picture memory type people. I
Yeah.
can't remember the term
He
for
doesn't
it.
sleep. So,
Well, yeah, he doesn't sleep. He
photographic
has
memory.
all this
Or
time.
graphic.
But yeah,
No.
photographic. You know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yep.
uh, but essentially, like he absorbs, like if someone, let's just say someone dies
Mm-hmm.
or gets murked inside that dungeon,
Mm-hmm.
when he absorbs their essence, he learns everything within, blink of an eye.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, for everyone else, this might take 100 years or so for everyone to understand.
Well, yeah, and you get to see that with the chapters with Cal, like just what is time, right? Like the first couple chapters take place over such a long period of time, but because of Cal's perspective, um, especially like early on, where he's like, "Oh man, I went so far," and it's like, you went a couple feet, dude." It took
Yeah.
Yeah,
forever. It's like,
That's
you're
oh,
not quite there yet.
yeah. Um,
And then same thing when he ascends into or goes into the D rankings and
mm,
he's got it all walled off.
hmm
But we get that nice bring back to reality with Danny because he's like, "How long was I gone?"
Yeah.
She was like, "Oh, 4 days." That's another thing he does really well. He'll follow a character, Cal, and he'll do an event or a time, and then we'll get to see it from Dale. It's not really a time hop, but
hmm
we'll get to see the same event from a different perspective,
mm,
and he did really well on that for me. For example, Cal puts the wall down, talks about developing his fractal, and then he goes into making new mobs for the new um, space that he's created, and then you get a snippet or you flip over to Dale, and Dale goes through, okay, the dungeon's closed, talks to Frank, learns how, opens his first meridian,
hmm
and does all this other stuff in that same time frame.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoy seeing it from one perspective, and he doesn't do long time hops. It's little snippets. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel the pacing was really good in the book. It's a decent sized book, but nothing felt rushed.
yeah. And oh my, there's so much potential.
Yeah.
And that's pretty typical. Tune in next time to see if Goku will defeat this guy.
Right.
Spoiler, he does.
Uh,
But they
Only
were
after
just,
3 evolutions. So.
yeah.
and a lot
And
of
that's where
yelling.
everyone's like, oh, they
Yes.
spend a whole episode powering up, but he trains.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he can
Yeah.
defeat everything regardless. He did go to the hyperbolic time chamber.
Uh,
He did respawn or eat his sensu bean.
yes.
He trained.
Yes.
He did stuff.
That's cheating, all right?
And for those of you watching this afterwards, feel free to comment the references these two guys sprinkle throughout the stream down below, and who knows,
Yeah.
maybe we'll come up with a prize for you guys or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All right. Before we finish this off, favorite character that's been introduced in this book.
okay. Favorite character from book one. Hmm.
Uh, for me, all right. So obviously, main characters aside, because that's a lot of the book is dedicated towards character
Okay.
development for those two.
So not Cal or Dale.
I mean, though you can include them if you want, but those are the usual two for me. Like if I were to say,
I
who's
follow.
your
I
favorite
follow.
character?
Yeah. Dale's
So
definitely not my
being
favorite.
different, Dale is not my favorite. If anything, he's towards the bottom of my list
Right.
because I am not a big fan of him.
Right.
Uh, anyway, so my favorite character, and this might come as a shock to you guys, is Father Richard.
Dang
I
it, I was going to pick that
Oh
one
man, maybe
because
not.
Aha!
He's
a
a
lot of the other people didn't have a long enough time
hmm
to give a good impression. Kind of like I was talking about Rose. I was gonna pick her because she kind of has that sharp transition.
Mm-hmm.
But Father Richard, I just kind of like when he first is talking. We see him with Frank,
Yes.
and he's like, "Hey, this is what we have to do." And you see his interaction with Frank, and then he goes over and he has an interaction with
Hans.
Hans,
Right.
and we get a couple chuckles out of that. But then he meets Dale, and you see his interaction with him, and it just the way he actually still has respect for people
Mm-hmm.
instead of James, where James
I
is
was just
just
about to
like,
say
"Oh,
that.
you're a fishy, you're nothing to me." Father Richard actually is like, "Hey, I'm here to do a good job. I know." You're at this rank, and I'm not going to talk down to you. I'm just going to explain it differently.
Yep.
And
He
yeah,
does take advantage of it though. He
As does everyone
as
else.
does
Yeah.
everyone else with Dale, right? But Father Richard, like he's not on James level, but what happened with that building, right? Conveniently overnight take up 3 lots instead of just the one. Uh,
Oops.
yeah,
Oopsie. My
oops,
bad.
you know,
but he explained it, and it made some
sure.
semblance of
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, as do
It
everyone
gives
else
you.
as they interact with Dale. Um, but yeah, Father Richard's definitely up there for me. Um, I'm going to count Danny as a main character just because she would probably be my favorite. I definitely enjoy her humor that she brings to the story. So ruling her out, um, so does it have to be just what we got exposed to in book one? Because there's some characters that really just develop further through the series.
That's what I said though,
So,
because we get a small
mm-hmm,
snapshot, and we don't
mm-hmm,
really get character development for like
No.
Adam, Rose, or Tom.
Not. I mean, you can choose whoever, but like in terms of like explaining things,
yeah,
like some people might not understand.
right, right, right,
Well,
right,
I'm
right,
I'm
right.
trying not to ruin the other
Only
books.
spoilers for book one. I definitely like Hans. Uh, I like Hans a lot. He brings a lot of
But
humor and plays as a good mentor and role to the group. Um, Tom's a lot of fun, but he grows a lot as the story progresses. But
Yeah.
I enjoy his humor. What are some of your favorites, John?
um,
Or he said Father Richard.
Father
yeah, I
Richard.
said Father Richard.
You said Father Richard, and I
Yeah,
said
and I
Father
said
Richard.
yeah.
Character
Father
of book
Richard's a
one
good
is
one.
Father
Yeah,
Richard for Dungeonborn.
Yeah.
yeah. He's a dark horse in that book.
Yeah. Well, even in
Uh,
the church too, right? Because he's our demon slayer. Um,
yeah.
thank
Yeah.
goodness he got that prime real estate when the
Dale's out of commission.
yeah, yeah,
The
the cat. Um,
Oh yeah,
dementia
yeah,
cat.
yeah.
yeah,
And that's another thing that I respect about the character, because like he has this awesome power, and in James's sense, he's like, I could squash you like a bug. You're nothing to me. Where Father Richard's like, watch this, or hold my beer, and he just giant. I love the descriptor too, because it's like the sound of a symphony and a rock exploding or something for when he makes the
yeah,
glass.
yeah. The
And you
Sunder.
see,
Um,
yeah.
hmm It does a great job with the magic system. And it just continues to develop in the future books. Let's see. So we covered characters, we covered favorite action scenes, mentioned a couple of the comic relief. It's a well-rounded book. Um,
Yeah.
final.
It doesn't really leave off with a like a cliffhanger or anything, but it definitely
What
wants
are
you to
you
make.
talking about?
What?
Motherfucking cliffhanger,
uh,
dude died.
uh,
Or sorry.
That's
Like,
language. Want to keep it PG, but It does wrap up a lot of the story arcs though, right? Kind of get some resolution. No, Peter's facial expressions say
And
no.
this is where this is all opinion based,
Yes.
and this is why we have people come in and geek out with us. Because
And
for me, it ended with the main character dying, being saved by the tree, which is really the dungeon, hearing random voices in your head, and all his meridians being open. Like, we just saw the snippet of him being able to cycle essence to his eyes and utilize that, and what all can come of that. Now he's got every meridian open. Like,
yeah. Okay,
yeah,
okay. Yeah.
it,
He went Super Saiyan.
Which he
yeah,
he well he went so in terms of Naruto, he now has access to every different type of essence, like
Yes.
earth, air,
Yes.
fire. Like so this guy just went from like pushover style to like
In a no affinity dungeon, so he can just cultivate all that. Find
yeah,
out
this
more
is
in book 2 of
all I
the
know
Divine
is that
Dungeon.
if he ends up being like Naruto-esque, I became Hokage by
I don't know, man. He's already a noble in
defeating
book 1.
I
I just
mean,
need
it's like any origin story. He's the main
Yeah,
character. He starts off as a nub,
yeah,
and he's gonna end up awesome.
maybe. I mean, they killed
Right.
him book 1. Who knows
hopefully
what's going
not.
to happen in book 2? Like, uh,
Someone needs to come around and teach him a lesson or two, and not a like a learning lesson, like kick him in the face
like
lesson.
a bucket over
I
the
I
head in the
feel like he
morning
gets.
lesson.
Say that
A,
again.
a bucket of ice water over the head if he's not out of bed on time lesson.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no. You know what I mean.
Uh,
Because he
I'm
'cause obviously that does happen to him.
uh,
But I just want someone not necessarily teach him a lesson, but like take him down a peg or two,
mm,
so he understands where he's at,
yeah,
and not necessarily like I'm not talking like noble, like actual. I'll just say prince or
right.
princess, whatever. Like level, like you're at this rank, so on and so forth. I'm just talking like
People try.
you need,
He just
yeah.
doesn't
I
listen.
mean, yeah. I mean, if I was in his spot, I'd probably be the same way.
Uh,
Like not listen, just doing whatever I need to get done. And he does take the initiative in some regard,
mm,
trying to better, like this is for the town, this is for the people.
yes.
Uh, but I don't know, just the fact that he sticks his nose into literally every concept,
Yeah,
and then just tries to, he tries to play the hero.
right.
I don't know. This might just be the fact that I'm super into like anti-hero stuff,
And
and
as
it just doesn't vibe with me.
as
this
Peter was
this is not
saying,
an underdog book.
yeah, everybody's entitled to their opinion. We do not have the default correct perspective on things. We welcome people to disagree with us in the chat and in the comments section on this book. Um, but yeah, I follow you, John, on Dale. He grows on me throughout the series though. Um, and I think it's intentional. Like it gets so tiresome having the perfect heroes, right? That could do no wrong. That oh, they're not going to kill them. It's one of the reasons why I like Game of Thrones so much. Like, oh, what? You like this character? He's on his way to the top. What was the big spoiler of this book, Pete?
Main character dies, story's over.
Yeah, main character dies. Story's over.
I,
You think these
that's
kids are off limits? Um, you know,
Think again.
they can die. Unlike
yeah.
games, to our knowledge, there is limited respawns. Not always. Um, unless you're Dale.
Yeah, unless you're Dale.
Unless you're Dale or Cal. Um, yeah, wrapping things up. Final thoughts, guys. Obviously, we're continuing the series. I've made it through the whole series several times. Big Dakota Krout fan. Um,
So, as far as next Sunday at the same time, we will not be doing book two
Mm-hmm.
due to scheduling issues. We will be doing
The
uh,
Bobaverse, book one.
Bobaverse book one.
Yes.
Okay,
The book
so see you
review,
next week.
yeah, the book review's already uploaded. So one of the things we're trying to work on is get spoiler-free book reviews uploaded earlier. That way, if we do a Geek Out stream on it, you guys have an opportunity to watch that, get the book done, and then join us for the full of spoilers book discussion / Geek Out stream. Um, really appreciate you joining us for this one, John. Hope to get you on some future ones with the Divine Dungeon series.
Oh yeah.
Final thoughts,
Really enjoyed this book. Can't recommend it more than I already have,
right?
and I've just been, uh, as you already might have heard earlier, like I'm already done with book two.
Mm-hmm.
I if it weren't for work and you know doing other things, I could have finished this book in like probably a day or two, and I just that's how like into it I got,
Yeah,
and I just can't. It's an awesome read.
it really is, and it only gets better. So
Oh, yeah. Yep.
thanks everybody for joining us, being patient with us as we worked through the technical issues, and yeah, hope to geek out with you guys here soon.
Bye.
Bye.